Jim Lee up on screen. Come on, Jim. Here he is, Jim Lee, climategear.com.
Hey, Bettina, can you hear me fine?
Oh, we can hear you perfectly fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. How's everybody?
I think we are pretty overwhelmed with all the beautiful and amazing and incredible information we've heard so far. So keep going.
Well, I've spoken previously about, geoengineering, and I wanted to kind of hyper focus this presentation on something a little more on topic. If you could enable my screen sharing, I don't know if that's possible. So somebody sent me this document, and it was literally published July 5th, 2023. And there's been a rapid focus on the geoengineering problem as it pertains to airplanes specifically. And I'll just let me bring this up real quick and tell me y'all can see that. Okay, and I'll make it really, really big. So maybe not that big. Towards the elimination of soot and soot emissions from jet fuel combustion. Now, I've focused pretty specifically on soot, carbon black dust, black carbon, all of these things, because this is the cloud seed that makes the problem. A lot of people would argue pumps, pipes, all of these things above, these are simultaneously possible, but this is the untold story, the one that nobody really wants to focus on. And I'm not going to read you all of this because it's, brand new and all of that. But there's a lot of people trying to get the soot out of airplane exhaust because it is the thing that's creating all of the clouds specifically. But I think this one line right here might actually blow your mind, and that is about 1 million tons of carbonaceous, quote, soot nanoparticles are released every year by aviation through incomplete combustion of jet fuel. Now, we were doing a thought experiment. Hold on a second. I was trying to end the share, not new share. Me, the Zoom noob. Okay. Well, we'll just go over to this real quick. And all right, there we go. The soot issue. Oh, there's the button. The soot issue has been a big problem because recently the climate elite, the IPCCs of the world, they've realized that the clouds that are being created are basically, in effect, they are the greenhouse. They are what's trapping heat at the surface. We have something called solar radiation management. I'm pretty sure Nikki covered that in her presentation, and that's the idea of blocking incoming solar radiation, reflecting it back to space. But what about the heat that makes it to the ground? Why is it getting trapped at the ground? Is it really CO2, or is it that planes are making a blanket over the planet that won't allow heat to escape back to space? This is why in President Joe Biden's recent solar radiation modification proposal, they mentioned something called cirrus cloud thinning or cirrus cloud seeding. This is a geoengineering proposal to actually melt these clouds away at night. Not during the day. They want to keep these clouds because they cool during the day, but at night allow heat to escape back to space. So I kind of want to dive into what does soot have to do with this and how it's really the central theme of this entire narrative. So I'll bring that up now. And this is a PowerPoint presentation. You can find it on climateviewer.com/cirrus clouds matter. If you go to climateviewer.com/cirrus clouds matter, you can download this. You're free to distribute this however you like. So let's get into it. Carbon black dust and soot. Crucial for artificial cirrus cloud creation. It's used in weather warfare, U.S. Air Force, Navy, FOIA documents, Freedom of Information Act requests. Geoengineering, carbon black dust soot are carriers of metal and sulfur into the stratosphere. Ozone, CBD and soot levitates into the stratosphere. Metals and sulfur destroy ozone. Is released by the exhaust of the jet aircraft by burning fuels, soot, or pumped directly from military aircraft, carbon black. So, carbon black and soot are often used interchangeably. However, carbon black is physically and chemically distinct from soot. Soot is an unwanted byproduct of combustion. Carbon black is composed of turbostatic colloidal aggregates, which are called aciniform carbon, AC grape-like structures. That's why soot and carbon black water sticks to it. It's shaped like a bundle of grapes at its basic, molecular size. Carbon black is manufactured under controlled conditions for commercial use. Greater than 97% of carbon black consists of elements of carbon arranged in a aciniform particulate, grape-like structure. So, military application versus commercial pollution. Carbon black dust in the military, increase cirrus cloud cover, decrease precipitation, dissipate fog. Scientific weather modification for hurricane modification, increase or decrease, create drought, precipitation, increase cirrus cloud cover, dissipate fog. Commercial aviation, weather modification and geoengineering, increase cirrus cloud cover, alter rainfall patterns, affect solar radiation, cools by day, traps heat by night, contains metals coated in sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid. Filled with metals. So the detected metallic compounds were all internally mixed with soot particles. The most abundant metals in the exhaust were chromium, iron, molybdenum, sodium, calcium, and aluminum. Also detected were vanadium, barium, cobalt, copper, nickel, lead, magnesium, manganese, silicon, titanium, and zirconium. All of these act as ice nucleating particles or cloud condensation nuclei. And there are many, many studies on this, but all of the metals that people attribute to chemtrails are already in the jet fuel. Why? Because oil has this naturally, and when they refine it into kerosene or jet fuel, it's still in there. So when I told you at the very beginning, 1 million tons of soot nanoparticles in the year, per year, that does not account for how many millions of tons of nanoparticles of these metals are being distributed by planes. Ozone destruction, because according to the Indian Space Organization, though airborne black carbon is known to dissipate and settle after a few months under the influence of rain and wind and is unlikely to travel upwards of 4 kilometers, however, a group of scientists, including the Indian Institute of Science and ISRO Vikram Sarabhi Space Center, say they now have evidence of such particles, black carbon, existing up to 18 kilometers in the stratosphere, and there's about 10,000 of them in every cubic centimeter. Given the shape and location of these particles, they argue it could only derive from the emissions of aviation fuel. And they pose a problem because these black carbon particles can linger long enough to provide a fertile ground for other chemical reactions that deplete ozone layer. And this, if you want to look up the science on this, obviously you can download this PowerPoint, but the title of the article was Possible Climatic Implications of High Altitude Black Carbon Emissions. 10,000 soot nanoparticles per cubic centimeter, 18 kilometers in the sky. And one has to ask yourself, is this geoengineering? Well, let's ask a geoengineer, David Keith, who said engineered nanoparticles could exploit photophoretic forces, enabling more control over particle distribution and lifetime than is possible with sulfates, perhaps allowing climate engineering to be accomplished with fewer side effects. By photophoretic, he means self-levitating. Because it is black, it actually lofts itself. It's heated by the sun, and it goes up. So soot coming from planes reaching 18 kilometers, clearly planes don't fly that high. That's how that happens. What happens if we deplete the ozone layer? Harmful ultraviolet radiation would kill all plant life on the planet. Exposure to solar UVB radiation will kill marine life. UVB causes non-melanoma skin cancer, malignant melanoma development, cataracts, could affect terrestrial and aquatic biochemical cycles. It's bad. You don't want to destroy the ozone layer, so we probably should protect that. So along comes Harry Wexler in 1961, and he warned about this ozone destruction from rockets. Wexler was concerned that inadvertent damage to the ozone layer might occur if increased rocket exhaust polluted the stratosphere. And what he specifically said, climate control can best be classified as interesting hypothetical exercises until the consequences of tampering with large-scale and atmospheric events can be assessed in advance. Most such schemes that have been advanced would require colossal engineering feats and contain inherent risks of irremediable harm to our planet and side effects of counterbalancing the short-term benefits. This is on the possibilities of climate control, 1962, by Harry Wexler. But of course, he had a heart attack before he could give his speech on the possible global weather control from rocket exhaust. And this was in 1962, followed up by 1964, the Rand Corporation writing pollution of the upper atmosphere by rockets. And they said, yeah, it would be a bad thing, but then go on to say, maybe we should actually do these last conclusions have implications for future tracer experiments using these substances, specifically trimethyl aluminum, barium, strontium, cesium, lithium. These are what sounding rockets launch into the atmosphere. And they apparently thought it was a great idea. Ooh, I clicked a link instead of actually clicking the next slide. Uno momento. All right. No clicking the links. And this is a picture of Harry Wexler, and this is a newspaper article on the topic. Scientists warn space-age fuels may affect world's life by changing weather. Another very seldom talked about, my goodness, this is going to become a problem, isn't it? I'll just roll the wheel. So I did a graphic on this just to illustrate what's going on here. So at 39,000 feet or 12 kilometers, this is where the tropopause is. This is where we live in the troposphere. The stratosphere is above 12 kilometers. Now, this varies where you are on the planet and what time of the year it is. But generally speaking, that's true. So the ozone layer is at 20 to 30 kilometers, 12 to 19 miles. And planes typically fly around that 30,000 feet to, given some 49,000 feet. So they're flying right on the line between the troposphere and the stratosphere. That is why we're finding so many metal and soot nanoparticles in the ozone layer. And that is why this is such a big problem. And you combine that with the number of ionospheric heaters, SuperDARN, which is super dual radar network, ISCAT incoherent scatter radars, missile defense radars, lasers, ionosondes, ELF and VLF, extremely low frequency, very low frequency transmitters, This map can be seen at climateviewer.org, and you can see all of the different multi-million watt radars that are effectively heating the chemical soup above your head. So is this a new thing? Everybody says, no, I remember blue skies. This is a relatively new phenomena, but the newspapers would argue with you. So in 1958 in Palm Springs, California, they said jet trails, dim sun, Palm Springs gripes. And, in the first article, which was from the Spokane Daily Chronicle, December 6, 1958, they say, as you know, Cooper wired, our entire economy is dependent upon the tourist trade, which is predicated on our bright sunshine and warm climate. Recently, our skies resembled a mob of exuberant skyriders performing an aerial circus. The contrails are not disappearing, but are breaking down into a haze and creating a cloud-like appearance in the sky. 1958. Does that sound like everything you've heard from everybody today? So is this a new, problem? I would argue not. In fact, when they said the Air Force so far is flabbergasted, well, they weren't flabbergasted long, because in January 1959, in the desert sun, Air Force gives village two choices: live with the trails or move. Let's face it, men, said a crisp-talking, star-studded general, you'll either have to live with the vapor trails or move the city of Palm Springs. The resort area, it appears, is known as the Palm Springs intersection, the freeway interchange of all West Coast aerial traffic. So the city officials and civic leaders, in an apparently unanimous, unspoken agreement, decided that a peaceful coexistence with the Air Force was the wisest course. So basically, there are highways in the sky, and Palm Springs happens to be at the intersection of many of these highways in the sky. And the Air Force basically told them, deal with it or move the whole darn city. 1959. In 1958 also, Dr. Florence Van Straten, Navy scientist, creates clouds, breaks them up using ordinary carbon black. Now, you're going to probably be very sick of me saying the words carbon black before the end of this, but I want to overwhelm you with the evidence. The proof is in the pudding. In 1958, Dr. Florence Van Straten said, when we dropped carbon black suspended in a liquid over a track a mile long and produced a solid line of clouds 1 mile long, Dr. Van Straten told a reporter. When we dropped 1.5 pound dry packages of carbon black, we produced single clouds with each drop. The Navy teams seeded 7 clouds with carbon and dissipated each of them in from 2.5 to 20 minutes. Each cloud turned gray and then rapidly disappeared. Aside from the cost of the airplanes, we spent less than $5 on the experiments in Georgia. So this carbon black is the exact same stuff that you find in a laser jet printer, the toner cartridge, that fine black powder. They were literally just throwing it out of the back of the plane and creating and destroying clouds depending on how much carbon black they threw out. And we all know that President John F. Kennedy in 1961 addressed the United Nations and said, we shall propose further cooperative efforts between all nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control. Following his death, Lyndon Johnson, well, actually, I believe this is when he was still vice president. Yes. It lays the predicate for and foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather. And he who controls the weather will control the world. Now, did he mean determine as in be able to see and thus determine where the clouds are, or to control the cloud cover. Well, I think the next quote really says it all. Control of space means control of the world. The Masters of Infinity, from space, the Masters of Infinity would have the power to control Earth's weather, to cause drought and flood, to change the tides and raise the levels of the sea, to divert the Gulf Stream and change temperate climates to frigid. He's literally saying that from space, they could raise the levels of the sea and change the temperatures of entire climates. That is climate control. That is what they blame global warming on. But in 1962, Lyndon Baines Johnson, our president, was saying we could do all of that from space. More history on the plane pollution problem. 2 states sue over black belch and cirrus clouds. The state of Illinois and New Jersey sued the airline industry in 1970, and in an apparently unanimous agreement, quote, the government will tell the nation's 43 commercial airlines Tuesday that they must end, quote, pollution of the skies with jet engine smoke. So we've now seen a transition from the term vapor trails that were creating clouds to pollution of the skies with jet engine smoke. And this was also referred to as black belch. That black is the carbon black, is the soot. On the possibility of weather modification by aircraft contrails, 1970, the possibility, likely contrails are affecting precipitation to a much greater extent than present deliberate seeding operations, i.e., there are people out there who are already cloud seeding to do weather control, weather modification. However, Wallace Murray was basically saying, look, planes are actually doing more weather modification and more effectively than anything we're even trying. William Gray and Company in 1974 wrote a paper called Weather Modification by Carbon Dust Absorption of Solar Energy. And they basically said, weather modification through solar energy absorption by carbon aerosol particles, that they could steer hurricanes by dumping carbon black into them. 1974. And of course, little ever mentioned anymore, but when I was in high school, it was all the rave. One of the culprits, one culprit that really causes it, in my opinion, is the exhaust spewed out by jet airplanes that travel through the skies constantly. It's called acid rain. Acid rain is something that's not talked about anymore. Of course, they talk about ocean acidification if you're talking about climate change. This is not part of the discussion, but this letter, from 1982, specifically a high-flying theory on the acid rain problem, says, yeah, it's probably the planes. But let's get to the fun part, the weather warfare part, the part nobody really wants to talk about. In 1994, in Spacecast 2020, in a highly redacted paper, basically the entire sheet of the one sheet in here is completely boxed out. You cannot read any of it. But what you can read is previous USSR weather modification efforts, big redacted block, and then one sentence. This demonstrated an ability to generate infrared defeating clouds, effectively denying overhead surveillance. That Russia was creating clouds that could not only block out visual spy satellites, but even infrared satellites could not see heat signatures underneath it. And this was referring to something long in the past. Also, 1994, there was a Freedom of Information Act request done by the sunshineproject.org. Their website has been deleted. You can find it on archive.org on the Wayback Machine. And this is U.S. Air Force Freedom of Information Act request Title: Weather Modification Using Carbon Black, proposed by the United States Air Force Phillips Laboratory Geophysics Directorate. And they say solar heating of carbon dust could be deployed at theater scale to achieve precipitation enhancement, to create cirrus clouds, and to dissipate fog and low clouds. And then they go into previous times when they did it, like Operation Popeye, employed precipitation enhancement techniques to muddy the Ho Chi Minh Trail, reducing flow of supplies from northern Vietnam. Long history of using weather warfare going back to obviously Vietnam, the making it illegal in 1978 with the Environmental Modification Convention. Now we're in 1994, and they say, you know what? We probably should get good at this again. Well, the United States Navy, who was also part of Operation Popeye, at China Lake Naval Warfare Station in California, they had a Freedom of Information Act request, and it was titled Non-Lethal Warfare Proposal Weather Modification. And it says capabilities and uses to impede or deny movement of personnel and material because of rain, floods, snow blizzards, etc., to disrupt economy due to effect of floods and droughts, and quote, successful completion of the proposed effort and follow-on E&MD programs will give the United States military a viable, state-of-the-art weather modification capability again. I know of no countermeasures, meaning there's no way to stop this. If somebody shoots a heat-seeking missile at you and you're flying in the air, you can deploy chaff, and that will hopefully make the heat-seeking missile go away. That is a countermeasure. There are no countermeasures for weather warfare. And of course, Nikki had just mentioned this in the presentation we were watching. Weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. One thing that most people miss about this document is right dead center of the document is a little chart. And I love a good chart. Application to weather modification versus time. And over here you see now being 1995, 1996. And it's got all of these things up here, global weather network, sensors, computer modeling, CHEM, which stands for chemicals, ADV, which stands for aerospace delivery vehicles. They have all that. Directed energy, artificial ionospheric mirrors from HARP, and then SC for smart clouds, nanotechnology. In the future, they predicted 2005 carbon black dust, CBD, and it has a star next to it. That star says technologies to be developed by Department of Defense. What's interesting is if we flip back to this Freedom of Information Act request, you'll see that down here they have project plan major milestones. Numerical modeling, 1996, engineering design of a test engine modification, 1997, ground-based field trials completed, 1999, airborne test evaluation prototypes completed, 2001, and engineered design of airborne carbon black delivery systems completed, 2003, operational capability, 2004. So maybe this 2005 number wasn't just an estimate, considering that 2 years before, there was a Freedom of Information Act request from the Navy saying, hey, yeah, we're going to do carbon black dust. That's a great idea. The Air Force one, which was, of course, the Air Force Phillips Lab was the Freedom of Information Act request. It is no coincidence that Dr. Arnold A. Barnes Jr. gave a presentation at Test Technology Symposium 97, in which he said basically, you know, we're going to use of carbon black to retarget precipitation, fog dissipation, and cirrus cloud enhancement. And he literally has PowerPoint slide says weather modification using carbon black to increase precipitation, to decrease precipitation, to make droughts or floods. And then he goes on to say, this is slide 2, weather modification using carbon black, increase cirrus cloud cover. That is what everybody is seeing. Whether you want to call it a contrail, a chemtrail, or a plane fart, whenever the chemicals come out and they make a cloud, and that cloud fans out and covers the sky, that is an ice cloud, that is a cirrus cloud. So when the military is saying that we can increase cirrus cloud cover using carbon black dust or soot, that they want to do it, why? To deny visual satellite or high altitude reconnaissance, to block out satellites in space, to decrease light level for nighttime operations. This happened during Operation Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, where basically you saw the Republican Guard who had, T-72 tanks and, all this Russian military equipment that was provided to them. But we had night vision. We being America, we had night vision. So going out and creating cloud cover in the middle of the night, making it as dark as possible, gives the military a distinct advantage. So this is a reason why the military would want to create clouds at nighttime to block out the ability for the enemy to see you. And here I have a history lesson on all of the additives and how things came together. And I won't really get into this because it's kind of, redundant at this point. But the NATO single fuel concept, where NATO switched fuels from gasoline-based fuels to kerosene-based fuels from 1988 to 1996. And what you realize is during that time, going from JP5 at 2,100 parts per billion to 9,300 parts per billion of aluminum. Calcium in JP5, 5,000 parts per billion. When they switched to JP8, 31,000 parts per billion, or 31 parts per million. That's a ton of calcium. Calcium is a metal. You go all the way down the list. All of these are the different metals: strontium, titanium, vanadium, zirconium, all the ones I mentioned before. So titanium went from 35 parts per billion to 1,000 parts per billion. You can see it all the way down the board. Nanoparticles of metal drastically increased when all 40 NATO countries switched to this new JP8 jet fuel. This happened in 96, and by 1997, the first article ever written about chemtrails with the word chemtrail in it on the internet, that article was about JP8 jet fuel. So in 2008, President Obama and the Department of Homeland Security had a hurricane modification workshop. As previously mentioned, like in 1974, the idea of dumping carbon black dust in a cloud in a hurricane to steer it. Dr. Mosh Alamaro from MIT University was at that meeting, and he said on hurricane modification by carbon black dispersion methods, risk mitigation, and risk communication. This presentation is focused on use of carbon black aerosol to selectively heat parts of the atmosphere by dispersion of carbon black aerosol above a hurricane. In this diagram over here, they show a C-130 dumping soot into a portion of the hurricane, and then the sun heating that black chemical in this portion of the hurricane over here, and that altering the track of the hurricane. What's old is new, and history repeats itself. Contrail control. This is really stemming from 9/11/2001, the attack on the Twin Towers. And during that time, all flights were grounded. And as you can see by this photo here, there were very few clouds over America. And These three stripes are Air Force One, the president, and some military planes flying along with it. And as a result, David Travis and a group of people from Langley Research Center wrote a paper called Regional Variations in U.S. Diurnal Temperature Range for the 11 to 14 September 2001 aircraft groundings, evidence of jet contrail influence on the climate. The point they made was that because the temperature at night got colder during this time, because there weren't any flights creating artificial clouds, that the temperature widened between the heat of the day and the cold of the night. This was the first time that they said, oh crap, we're in trouble. Here you can see an animation. Again, this is the second time in 2009 during the Iceland volcanoes. Basically the Iceland volcano eruption that grounded all flights over Europe in 2008. Jim Haywood wrote a paper, and in it they said a single aircraft operating in conditions favorable for persistent contrail formation appears to exert a contrail-induced radiative forcing some 5,000 times greater than recent estimates of the average persistent contrail radiative forcing for the entire civil aviation fleet. So this is literally one E-3 AWACS, which is a flying radar, doing circles. You can see the circles at first, and then it's spreading out to cover almost all of the UK, the United Kingdom. Another author who was the head of the IPCC's section on aerosol cloud interaction, Olivier Boucher, said, contrails formed by aircraft can evolve into cirrus clouds indistinguishable from those formed naturally. I think everybody listening to this knows that already. These spreading contrails may be causing more climate warming today than all the carbon dioxide emitted by aircraft since the start of aviation. This really throws into question the whole CO2 narrative on climate change, because according to Olivier Boucher and many, many others, the clouds are what are trapping heat, not the CO2. That's why you see articles like this, jet biofuel enlisted for contrail control, that basically, now that we believe that contrails that are turning into cirrus clouds are heating the planet, we better come up with a way to modify them so that we have them by day, not by night, because at night they heat the planet. And these biofuels come from many different sources. They have these HEFA, they have these what's called the Fischer-Tropsch process. They have the landfill waste to jet fuel. HEFA is like chicken fat, camelina plant, algae. They have what's called bio oils. Syngas. These are all of the different types of biofuels, but they throw in some creepy stuff like using the Jatropha plant, Jatropha biodiesel, a fuel derived from the crushed seeds of the Jatropha plant, water and a surfactant, then blended in different proportions with alumina nanoparticles. Basically adding aluminum nanoparticles to this biofuel increases engine performance. They do, however, add the little warning. Nanoparticles should be used judiciously because they tend to entrain in human bodies and brains. But that's not going to stop them from, making sure that the jet fuel burns really well and they get good mileage. Why screw that up? In 2015, me and my cohorts went to the United States Environmental Protection Agency and testified in front of a hearing that was televised on C-SPAN. And we basically told them clouds and metal pollution greater than greenhouse gases. That's what we're concerned about. Planes, geoengineering the planet, and dumping nanoparticles of metal into the atmosphere, which hurt people. Greenhouse gases never hurt anyone. And that's why I said that, why is the EPA claiming that 6 greenhouse gases emitted from jet airplanes are a threat to human health under the Clean Air Act, while doing nothing to address ongoing lawsuits over leaded aviation gasoline, or to the real health concerns of stakeholders worldwide, cancer-causing heavy metals in fuels and their additives, and aviation-induced cloudiness? I said it to their face. But, of course, they refer to this as accidental geoengineering. Whether it's planes or it's boats crossing the Pacific Ocean, bringing you all those shiny plastic things from China that you don't make in your own country, technocrats have decided to replace natural cloud formation with technological fixes dubbed accidental geoengineering. Ship tracks and aircraft contrail-induced cirrus clouds. MIT Technology Review. We're about to kill a massive accidental experiment in reducing global warming. This article was about the banning of bunker fuel, which released massive amounts of sulfur into marine stratocumulus clouds, creating ship tracks thousands of miles wide. Over here on the Smithsonian Institute magazine, airplane contrails may be creating accidental geoengineering. Dissipating ice haze from plane exhaust alters how sunlight reaches the earth and may be unintentionally affecting our climate. So, of course, it's all just an accident, the geoengineering. This ice haze that you're seeing, it's just an accident. However, not an accident are the geoengineering proposals, like deployment by plane, running on dirty fuel, dirty high sulfur fuel at cruising altitudes. Airplanes could supply plenty of sulfur dioxide to the stratosphere, which they are doing, and they have been doing for decades. In fact, all of these are quotes from different geoengineering proposals on different ways to put stuff into jet fuel and use the commercial aviation industry to geoengineer the planet. Options for dispersing gases from planes include addition of sulfur to the fuel, which would release the aerosol through the exhaust system of the plane, or attachment of a nozzle to release the sulfur from within its own tank, which would be a better option. Alan Robach, 2009. And all of these different ones, another technique examined was the use of commercial passenger aircraft flying high altitudes to inject sulfate aerosols emitted by aviation fuel into the stratosphere. So even the geoengineers themselves, they said, hey, we can just put a whole bunch of sulfur into that, into the jet fuel and let the planes just burn it. So, of course, the NASA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Germany's DLR, which is Germany's NASA, have been testing these biofuels for contrail control. Three different fuels are discussed: a low sulfur JP8 fuel, a 50-50 blend of JP8 and camelina based HEFA fuel, biofuel, and a JP8 fuel doped with sulfur, which is what the geoengineers were talking about, doping jet fuel with sulfur, adding sulfur. The first set of flight experiments were called alternative fuel effects on contrails and cruise emissions, access flights. And then there's the NASA DLR multidisciplinary airborne experiments, ND-MAX, and then the emission and climate impact of alternative fuel, ECLIF-2. So they're actively experimenting. This plane is literally flying through the plane farts to sniff out how much soot, how much metals. Is it going to heat the planet or is it going to cool it? This is no longer an accident. This is intentional. That's why when I interviewed Dr. Rangasai Halthori from the Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative at the FAA, he said, we would like to have more contrail-induced cirrus clouds during the day and none during the night. Ulrich Schumann from Germany's DLR said, less warming, more cooling contrails, predictable for operational planning. And Ulrich Lohmann, this is actually incorrectly listed up here, but it was called a cirrus cloud climate dial. I have an updated version of this graphic. I need to change this one, obviously, in the presentation. They said if the time and place of seeding is selected with care, the climate effect of cirrus thinning can be enhanced. For that, only long-wave warming effect of cirrus clouds should be targeted, and their solar effect should be avoided. This can be achieved if seeding is limited to high-latitude winters or nighttime seeding. The idea of doing cirrus cloud seeding to melt the clouds away, nighttime seeding, jives with what Dr. Rangasai Halthori said. We want more clouds by day, none by night. And that's how they intend to achieve it. So dope jet fuel geoengineering, stratospheric sulfate injections using commercial aircraft. This is FICA's COOL project, COOL. And they said the sulfur content of the fuel should be increased to about 50 times the current level to have significant cooling. Ulrich Schumann, the one who said less warming, more cooling, contrails predictable for operational planning. Well, he wasn't just speaking out the side of his head. He actually created a computer model called the Contrail Cirrus Simulation and Prediction Tool, COSIP, so that they could predict when and where these clouds would be created. And if they were going to cool the planet, keep them, they're going to heat the planet, melt them away with cirrus cloud seeding, or try to avoid creating clouds at all. And you see this also in the United States patent applications out there, fuel system for vapor trail control, fuel delivery system, two jet fuels in one fuel tank for contrail control, and then controlling the supply of a vehicle with multiple fuels using the jet fuel electronic control unit, so that they could have a biofuel in one tank and a sulfur doped fuel in another tank and be able to switch between the two on demand. So this leads to the cirrus cloud thinning idea, that if cirrus thinning works, it should be preferred over other methods that target changes in solar radiation, such as stratospheric aerosol injection, because cirrus thinning would counteract greenhouse gas warming more directly, because greenhouse gases cannot heat up if there isn't a blanket overhead. So cirrus cloud thinning, Trude Storyevmo, when she went to the weather modification conference, had this PowerPoint is from there, suggested cirrus cloud seeding material, bismuth triiodide. And then the highlighted section says seeding via commercial airliners. So they literally are saying, well, why don't we just attach something to the plane itself to sprinkle out the chemicals to melt the clouds away if they're flying at night? What are the solutions? Because that's really what GFC is all about, right? Coming up with solutions. Commercial aviation, don't fly. Tell the airline industry you're #grounded. That's what I tell my children when they behave badly. The airline industry's been behaving badly since 1958. That is proven through all of the historical documents, the newspapers, the lack of regulations on their emissions, and the fact that the EPA did nothing after the 2015 hearing we had. So demand that the International Civil Aviation Organization, FAA, NASA, and the DLR pursue options to stop creating cirrus clouds, not create more clouds by day, none by night, which is their current agenda. Scientific, Support the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. Demand transparency, a worldwide requirement to give prior notification before experimenting in the sky. Build a sensor network to detect illegal weather modification and geoengineering activity. Military, support the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. Give the weather warfare ban of 1978 teeth. Build a sensor network to detect illegal weather warfare activity. Pursue a complete ban on space weather modification. Ionospheric heaters and rockets. This is available at climateviewer.com/nmod. That's my solution, ENMOD. Because currently, these are all of the weather modification technologies in play today. 10 technologies to own the weather today. Ionospheric heaters, sounding rockets, satellites, lasers, cloud seeding, cloud ionization, stratospheric aerosol injection, ship tracks, contrail-induced cirrus, and water vapor pollution. All of these 10 technologies are what's messing with the weather today. This entire presentation was about number 9. I could do an equally long presentation on all 10 of these. That's why I've come up with the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. The idea is to put a sensor in your backyard that not only has a camera to see what you're seeing and record it for other people to observe, to report it in real time on a map, so that everybody's informed, to collect rainfall samples and do chemical analysis in real time on the rain that's falling in your backyard. So that if we see the telltale signs of weather modification, carbon black aerosols, titanium, aluminum, barium, strontium, any of these chemicals, and we see it not just in your backyard, but in your neighbors and all over your state, we can determine that somebody dumped something in your area, and we might just catch it on camera as well. Sensors are the future, the Internet of Things, as they put it. So why not use it for good? And thank you for listening to me harp on this carbon black dust soot tale. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead.
Wow. Wow.
I don't know why you were breaking up when I was just hearing you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there was a big applause for your presentation.
Okay, awesome. Well, I wanted to hyper focus on this topic because I don't think people realize how far back the history goes, and that something as simple as soot can be used as a weapon in war. That when you ask the military themselves, what's your weapon of choice? It has been consistently carbon black dust, soot, from 1958 with Dr. Florence Van Straten till today. All of the documentation, including Freedom of Information Act requests, say the same thing. We don't need any special nanobots. We don't need any special, Morgellons or any of these things to do weather warfare. We just need soot. And guess what? Every plane on the planet, and that paper was published literally July of this year, 1 million tons of soot nanoparticles each year go into the sky. So that's the big story that I see.
But it's not the military, right? We had a big laugh about this military thing. Jim, I have something for you because I was in contact with one of our MLAs. So MLA is a member of the legislature here in BC. Mm-hmm. And one of our supporters asked him a simple question. The question she asked was, who are flying these planes you see spraying cloud-like formations? And she sent him photos of the Vancouver chemtrails, and he never commented on the photos. So besides the fact that he never commented on anything, so this is his reply. Thank you for the email. I really think it's worth looking at a little physics when it comes to this issue. An MLA speaking. So, right? It's not mathematically possible for these to be seeding or any other form of containment spread from a plane. Contaminant spread from a plane. There isn't the space within the planes for any kind of material. There isn't the energy output to be able to carry the kind of material required. What is worth considering is this. A plane traveling, let's say 2,000 kilometers, leaving a trail across the sky that is 100 meters wide. This means the material required would be 2 million meters times 100 meters equals so and so many zeros now of material. Let's assume it takes 1 ounce to create what you are suggesting over a 100 square meters area. That means a plane would have to carry 2 million ounces of material. That is the equivalent of 125,000 pounds. The carrying capacity of a 737 is about 30,000 pounds. Account for passengers, luggage, fuel, etc. And there is no physical way that this plane could carry any, in capital letters, any material. In addition, it would likely require hundreds of ounces of material per square meter. So I fully understand your concern, but just a little math and physics suggests it's not physically possible. Sincerely, John Rusted.
John, who? Because I want to know who this moron is. Will you forward me his email so I can thoroughly spank his ass? Is he a scientist or is he just like a political moron? I want to know which kind of moron this is. Politician, lawyer, should have known. That's a very lawyerly answer, but it's not grounded in science at all. When you're talking about nanoparticles, you don't need, and this has been my argument all along, you don't need some kind of special container. You don't need all of these things because I'm going to bring this image up real quick just to really highlight this point. Share screen, this screen, the whole screen, and nothing but the screen. All right, there we go. This is that, when I showed you this earlier, I was talking about the metals, okay? And these are all the metals that are in jet fuel, okay? So I made a periodic table. Maybe I will send this documentation to that political moron and say, all of these metals are nanoparticle metals that are contained in jet fuel, not in some secret compartment, all of which have been found in cirrus clouds. Whenever the University of Finland flew through the plane, through the cirrus clouds and actually gathered the cloud seeds, the little microscopic center of each ice core that made up the cirrus cloud, they determined that they were made up of 75% man-made metals. Where did those man-made metals come from? They came from jet fuel. And everything that I read to you earlier from that PowerPoint, I combined this with another military study on the exact same thing, saying what metals are found in jet fuel and jet fuel exhaust. The jet fuel exhaust then mixes with water vapor already in the sky, plus part of the fuel combustion. And that's what cloud seeding and cloud creation is. You need a seed, you need a water vapor, and you need some sort of electric spark, some sort of ionization or static. This is not rocket science. So those are the metals that are just in the jet fuel. I don't know why, the guy would be so dumb about something so simple and give you such a complex answer on that. But as you can see, all of these metals are, these are alkaline earth metals. All the blue ones are transition metals right here. And then over here, we have the aluminum, silicon, and even tin, lead, sulfur, and selenium. All of these are what are coming out of the planes. You don't need a secret compartment. But more importantly, what I would argue with him is to go to ADSB Exchange. And I want everybody to write this down. ADSB Exchange. Now, what you'll see on ADSB Exchange is why that paper was saying that 1 million tons of nanoparticles of soot are in the air, because you can't even see the United States. These are all planes in the air right now. Not in the past, not in the future. This is live. When you click on any one of these planes, it'll tell you who it is, where they're flying, how high they're flying, and all that. The thing that's special about this one is that it will show military flights. No other flight tracker on the planet will show you the military flight. So you'll be able to go into this and actually click on these and see a C-17 Globemaster or a Chinook helicopter. I go in here because I live near an Air Force base. I double, triple check. I see the plane overhead. If I want to know if it's a military flight or a commercial flight, I can do that on ADSB Exchange. You cannot do that anywhere else because they do not accept military or government requests for censorship of ADSB, transmissions. So all of the flights here, if you come up here to Canada, you can see that clearly they're all there. And they have an altitude meter. So this one's flying pretty high right now. It is currently at 41,000 feet. Like I said, when I said they are flying very close, if not into the stratosphere, that plane right there is right on that line, Airbus A330. And it's flying at 41,325 feet. It just changed. But all of this is in real time. There's some private jet flying at 44,000 feet. So anything you see in pink, you're going to know is way up there. This one's flying at 46,000 feet, and so on and so forth. So if you really want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I suggest you come up here and, use ADSB Exchange exclusively. Do not trust the other flight trackers that, operate on pay for play models. This is an open source network, and they do not censor military flights. In fact, I think, no, sometimes I can spot the C-17s, but I'm not seeing any right offhand. I was trying to find a quick military plane, but you get the idea. And that's at globe.adsbexchange.com.
Well, but it's not the military. Oh, here's a question. Come on up, please.
Hi, Jim. Thank
Hey.
you for being a speaker here at this event. I did hear you twice before, so I'm listening to you the third time.
Awesome.
And what I'm interested in is, what can you tell us about the pilots who are really flying those aircrafts? Do you have any information on that?
So in most cases, most people don't understand that pilots really don't fly planes anymore. It's almost, let's just put it this way. There's a supercomputer at the FAA, and it's called the Next Gen NEXGEN Transportation System. And that's why there are highways in the sky. I'll highlight this one more time, just using the ADSB Exchange. So if you go down here and you look at the southern part of America, you can see this highway. I mean, it should be pretty clear to you that there is a highway here. This is why we end up with grid patterns in the sky. So these planes are all following certain flight paths, highways in the sky. The wind is moving east to west or west to east, and a plane comes by. Then the next plane comes by in the exact same spot. You want to test this for yourself? Hold a finger up in the air and actually put your finger on where that chemtrail, contrail, plane fart comes through. And then wait. And then when the next one comes through, you're going to see that this chemtrail is now over here and a plane flies by in the exact same spot. Now, the next one comes by and now you got 3 lines all drifting. Where there are intersections, because this is all by wire, this is all computer controlled, the pilot takes off. And then they pretty much set it on cruise control. And of course, they're there for any kind of turbulence or any kind of crazy stuff that might happen along the ride. But pretty much they can sit there with their hands folded in their lap and the plane's going to fly itself to the landing strip. And they land the plane. In between, there's not a lot going on. Another part of the next gen transportation system, something called the Aviation Environmental Design Toolkit, AEDT. What this does is it not only it takes in several factors into account, like noise near airports, so they don't want you. I finally found proof. Just going to bring it up on the screen real quick. Yeah, that's a United States military Lockheed Martin C-130J Super Hercules. So if you didn't believe me before about, being able to track military flights, now there's your proof. The Air Force is not excited about them having this ability. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, there's your C-130 right there and its flight path. So you can track military flights. You can tell the difference. You just got to go to your local neighborhood. And when you see the plane flying over, look for yourself. Those are all really close together. But anyway, I digress. That's a Sikorsky Sky Crane right next to it. What are they doing out there? Anyway, moving along. So yeah, the Aviation Environmental Design Toolkit also works with this whole idea of the contrail cirrus prediction tool and designing the environment. The idea being that they tell the plane, the computer tells the plane, not like the pilot's in there punching the chemtrail button. Because everybody goes, well, wouldn't everybody know? I mean, how many people would have to keep the secret? They don't have to keep the secret because they're ignorant to this whole process. All they know is, look, planes have been making contrails and making cirrus clouds since the 50s. This is normal. It's just normal, okay? Shut up, stupid people with your tinfoil hats. But in reality, if somebody were to modify that plane to use biofuels and Jet A or Jet A1, that remotely a computer could switch between the fuels at any given point, and the pilot would never know the difference. So having tools like the Aviation Environmental Design Toolkit allow the government, the regulators, also in Europe, they have what's called Eurocontrol. It's the same thing. It's a supercomputer that routes all the flights, but it also takes into account climatic impacts. So they can determine where ice supersaturated regions are or very wet bodies in the sky. And you'll see this now in the news. IATA targets non-CO2 emissions from airline industries. By non-CO2 emissions, they're pretty much letting the cat out of the bag. CO2-based climate, global warming is BS. We're targeting the non-CO2 emissions, i.e. the soot and the clouds that are being made. So there's much to do about what they call climate optimized routing of flights, so that at nighttime they don't fly over the poles, because, as they said, at nighttime these clouds trap heat. They don't want to create them during the day if, it's going to linger into the evening. So later in the day, they might, route the flight around an ice supersaturated region, so that and I'm sure everybody's had this question. Why do I see some days planes making no clouds at all, and other days they're all making clouds, or some are making clouds? If there is not enough water vapor in the sky and the conditions are not right, there will be no clouds. But if we have an oversaturated, which is what they call an ISSR, an ice supersaturated region, if a plane flies through that, you're going to get massive clouds that are going to linger for a long time. Why? Because, as previously stated, 1 million tons of nanoparticles. To try to visualize this, I was doing a thought experiment. I have a call-in show on my YouTube channel every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, at Climate Viewer on YouTube. And we were having a thought experiment. Somebody asked, well, what about this graphene? And, somebody else on some other website was talking about finding graphene in the rain. And I said, well, manufacturing graphene is really tough, because manufacturing nanoparticles is tough. Making nanoparticles from burning fuel is natural and easy. That's why. But if you actually built a assembly line to create nanoparticles, it would be very tough to make something so small you cannot see. So riddle me this, chat. How many nanoparticles would it take for me to make a softball? Like, if I were to pile nanoparticles on top of one on top of another, how many would it take to make a softball? And finally, my mathematician wizards in the Climate Viewer community came back with a number, 10 to the 64th power. So I wanted to look up what 10 with 64 zeros behind it was even called. Apparently, they don't have a name for a number that big. But the closest we could get was 1,000 sextillion nanoparticles in one baseball. So now I want you to try to do this in your head. Imagine that baseball and how much it weighs, and then times that by 1 million tons. How many baseballs would you have? That's how much soot nanoparticles are in the air. You think that's air you're breathing? Morpheus said in The Matrix. You're wrong. So to the politician, that's the kind of idiocy that doesn't understand how the atmosphere works, how nanoparticles work, how small nanoparticles are, and how many of them there are. So I hope that sufficiently answers the question. Pilots take off. They don't really control a thing after takeoff. They pretty much put it on cruise control, and supercomputers are figuring out and doing the math on, exactly what kind of damage they're doing to the environment. Are they helping happy clouds, or are they just pooping on the Arctic and, polar bears and stuff? I see Reinette. Hi, Reinette.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, what's up, Derek?
Hi, Jim. I've got a question, if you have time, before Reinette jumps in.
Sure.
Can you comment at all about the low-level aviation, such as the turboprops, assuming that they're using a similar fuel? If this stuff is being spread at a lower altitude, will it have the same negative effect, or will it help to mitigate the problems?
In a lot of cases with the turboprops, it's actually worse, because that's one of the things I mentioned in the slide when I was speaking to the EPA, when I said ongoing lawsuits over leaded aviation fuel. So many of the propeller driven planes, they also use something called avgas. And avgas also includes an anti-knock agent, which is essentially lead. So there's that problem in addition to many others. But even back in World War II, when the B-52 bombers were, going out to war, even those propeller planes were creating contrail cirrus. So this is not something unique to jets. You can go look up photos of B-52 bombers leaving white lines that streak across the sky. But riddle me this, and Dominic Marema, a fellow Canadian who worked with me on weather modification history, he sent me all of these documents on contrail suppression systems. So if the military has the ability to not create clouds, then why is this not happening in commercial aviation? And we know this to be a fact because if a B-2 bomber, which is a stealth bomber, or F-117 stealth bomber, can go out and fly and make no clouds at all through contrail suppression systems, because it's really dumb to fly over a foreign country and have a white line that points straight at your bomber that costs, several $1 billion. They don't want that because that bomber will be shot down. So if they have had contrail suppression systems, the newspaper articles in particular he had was a propeller plane, all right? And it was from like 1970s. And it shows 3 of the 4 engines all creating clouds, and the third engine, no clouds at all. And this was on a propeller plane. Then they have other newspaper articles showing the same thing on jet engines. If they can ensure that they're not going to create clouds with contrail suppression systems, then why is it still going on today? Is it just too expensive, or do they just not care? Or do they love their accidental geoengineering that much? Does that answer the question?
Yes, thanks very much.
All right. I definitely don't want to take up any of Reinette's time because Reinette's a doer, and I love that about her. So bring Reinette on and go get him, Tiger.
You're a doer. There's some doers out there. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Reinette. Good to have you on the show. Just a quick introduction and to the crowd here, because, well, it's been circling, of course, what you have been doing. But, of course, so Nikki introduced us to this wonderful powerhouse here, and she started a lawsuit in the United States, which we support, GFC, so Geoengineering Free Canada. We support her lawsuit. And after this event here, we put our heads together because we are forming a legal team here as well. But right now, as you all know, David is really super swamped with what he is doing for us here in the Okanagan. And after that, we're going to get together, and I know that Jim's going to support us as well. So welcome on Zoom stage, Reinette Senum.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be in Canada right now. So should I just give a little bit of my background? Is that best, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being where you are on a Saturday. It's beautiful here in Northern California. And I just want to let all of you know, just real quickly, my background is I'm living in the county I was raised in the Sierra Foothills since I was 4 years old. And I'm a 2-time mayor and 2-time vice mayor, 2-time council member in Nevada City, California, old gold mining historic town. And I have been very involved in the last 22 years with building up a more resilient community. And I do mean the non-United Nations version. I mean the mom and pop version. And so I've been very much involved in resiliency and, strong local food network and making sure we're, ready for any kind of influxions and energy or downgrids and so on. Plus working with the homeless and lots of things like that. Over the years, though, I have also been going down to Sacramento a lot, and I've testified before the Assembly or the State Senate, and I have actually gone up against some of the bigger, PG&E, AT&T, and Verizon down here in California to stop the implementation of 5G. And I've also been to a lot of geoengineering rallies, and I've been speaking up against it a lot over the years, which, as many of you would know, you do take a lot of flack for doing that. I became more COVID-centric when COVID hit and I was mayor of Nevada City. And for the last 3 years, I really pretty much, like many people, dropped everything around me and began really focusing on stopping this encroachment of COVID and vax mandates and, masks and closed businesses and schools and so on. And then this last winter here in Northern California, we got hit with a lot of snow just above us, a couple thousand feet. They had 60 feet of snow. And we had so much snow that we had trees falling, thousands of trees, ponderosa, conifer type trees that are meant for the snow were snapping in half, breaking in half, beautiful oak trees dropping. And it looked like a tornado or a hurricane had come through here. Over the last 3 years, I have seen an uptick for sure in more geoengineering. And we do know that we are here on, in Northern California and the West Coast are being very much subjected to, of course, a lot of commercial military aircraft as well. Plus we have the air, ship tracks, as they're called, from the cargo ships coming over from China and so on. So we get bombarded a lot. During this last winter, to let you all know, because we had such heavy snow loads, and the snow is very, very heavy now, it's extremely full of water content. So things are breaking and snapping quite within just like a few inches of snow. Things are breaking and buckling. So even our snow has changed a lot. And we had a lot of more mama warriors around Northern California and a little bit in Southern that took snow samples, water samples, rain, and also samples of hail. And of course, not surprisingly, we saw very, very high levels of aluminum and strontium and barium and cobalt and lead and copper, and the list goes on and on. Of course, aluminum is the worst. We also had individuals who sent me test results of their tree bark, very, very high in aluminum, and that was from 10 years ago. This individual, in fact, I did ask him to go back to the same tree that his mother owns on her property and test the bark 10 years later to see what the results are. So we're waiting for that. So over the course of this time, we live here in Northern California in a fire zone. We are not far from a little town called Paradise, about 60 miles away as the crow flies. And that was when I got back on the city council second time that Paradise burned. And so summers are very, very difficult for a lot of us. You can't really relax because at any second a horrific fire, you can just break out and your house, your town could be gone very quickly. So we kind of tiptoe on eggshells in the summertime. And it was winter that you could always take a breath and just go, okay, we're all right. But now, as what happened last winter, a tree fell along the side of my house 4 days later, 2:30 in the morning while sleeping, a tree fell in my partner's house, sounded like a train had gone through. And that was a tree that hit a tree from our neighbor's property over 100 feet away. So we're watching the trees around us die. I've seen a huge drop in pollinator population, bird population, wildlife. Just overall tree health is plummeting. We've been told that the reason why all these trees are dying, from sudden oak death to bark beetle, is because of the drought. However, last year at this time, we were still in the drought. I was pointing out that trees were dying along our banks of our rivers, right next to the banks of the rivers. So I kept pointing out this has nothing to do with the drought. It's very clear that the trees aren't getting the water. And of course, with the bark results that we've seen, and we know from other studies as well, is that the trees, many of the plants, the plant life, are not absorbing the water, the sugar, the nutrients. And so when you walk into our conifer forest, I don't know, it's like where you guys are, but when you walk into our forest, you used to smell this beautiful, robust conifer smell. And now you barely smell anything because the trees aren't expelling. They're not absorbing. They're not, breathing it in. They're not expelling. And so our trees are very brittle and they're dying all around us. So like many of you, I had been waiting for somebody to start bringing an end to this. And I've been waiting for certain iconic figures, whether they are in the geoengineering world or they're in the attorney world, the legal world. I've been waiting, or they're heads of large organizations. I've been waiting. And I reached out to a woman named Dina Pollard Sachs, who is a constitutional professor of 25 years, as well as an attorney. I met her about 1.5 years ago, and I said, I'd like to approach geoengineering through the lens of the US Constitution. And I don't want to fight the science. We really kind of looked about, like, how can we go about this as expeditiously as possible, as effectively as possible, and realizing, especially out the gate, because this is going to be a series of lawsuits, because there's a series of perpetrators at various levels in various forms. But the most important thing right now out the gate is to identify the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest target that we can come in sideways. And I equate it to Al Capone, bringing him, getting him thrown in jail because of, tax evasion. So we're coming at this sideways. We're not attacking science against science. It's too expensive, too lengthy. It's a she said, he said court case. And so we're coming at it at a different angle. We're coming at it looking at everything from protocol, administrative, the National Environmental Protection Act here we have in the United States. Was that abided by? So we're looking at these things. And so what happened is when I spoke with Dina Pollard Sachs, it was April 18th, I believe, that I decided to do a Give, Send, Go. So if you go to Give, Send, Go, you'll find stopUSgeoengineering Legal Fund. And we began raising money for the first series of legal research and deep dives. So we have been successful. We've gotten through the first phase. We wanted to raise 50,000, I think, with Give, Send, Go, plus what I've received outside of Give, Send, Go, we're around $40,000. So we've done the first round, which allowed us to kind of look at the playing field, identify that low hanging fruit, and go after the most effective target that will also have a ripple effect. It will give us what we call street credentials. We'll have a bigger donor base, get more publicity to mount a larger fight against a larger perpetrator. So we accomplished the first round. Now we're starting up the second round. And the second round is we've identified who we're going to go after. Many of you may be familiar with a company out of Box Elder. I think it's South Dakota. Could be North Dakota, but I think it's South Dakota. And they have what's called Make Sunsets Incorporated. Make Sunsets Incorporated was essentially banned in Mexico, the country of Mexico, just the beginning of this year, when last year Make Sunsets shot off a few launches of weather balloons with sulfur dioxide and other proprietary compounds. We don't know what they are. And they did these experimental geoengineering projects over Mexico. Well, Mexico is now banned experimental geoengineering projects. However, I have to say all geoengineering projects are actually one gigantic experiment. So there's a little irony there. So what's also happened, interestingly enough, is now Make Sunsets has left Mexico, but of course, they've now come to the United States, where they live, and they've launched already a few weather balloons. And what they did was, just this last year, they had to apply to the Department of Commerce through NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. And what they had to do, or administration, they had to actually apply, I think it's N714. It's a certain application that does not ask permission, is not a contract, is not, there's no oversight or approval whatsoever. It's just a reporting system of your planned and your reportings of your geoengineering projects, whether that is the sulfur, the silver dioxide or silver oxide being shot up from canisters from the ground, or it could be weather balloons, it could be SIAs, it could be military, it could be research organizations, it could be a corporation, does not matter. You just have to fill out this form. Make Sunsets, their form is filled out for the next 200 years. 200 years they plan on doing these projects. There's never been any kind of environmental impact statement, which is required by federal law, is required. And so basically at this point in time, we're looking at the procedural, applications and what they did and what they did not do according to federal law. This is the best shot we have right now. So now that we're beyond the legal research phase of like who are we going to go after and how are we going to go after them. I can't give you all the specifics beyond that. There's a lot more, but I can't. Now we're in the phase of, okay, now we got to get ready to file. We also have something that's very important I have to share with you. Interestingly enough, on June 3rd, President Biden signed the debt ceiling legislation, and within the small print was something that essentially eviscerated NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. That has been in place since the 1970s. It is the biggest congressional change of NEPA in its history. It essentially looks like it has the fox watching the hen house. And interestingly enough, we've had some environmental attorneys and experts look and do an analysis on these NEPA changes, and they said it's a hot mess. It's contradictory throughout. It makes no sense, terribly written, and ultimately they realize it's going to have to be decided by a court. And ultimately, we do not believe that this legislation that was signed by Biden is even legal. So we do have to look at that as well. So we're kind of looking through that lens because that's going to have an impact on us. So we're right now dealing with the NEPA, and we're also now looking and doing the deep dive also on other legal cases, precedents, how it applies to us, and exactly how we're going to come in and put in basically an injunction, a relief injunction on make sunsets. But this will affect all the other applicants through NOAA who are doing these geoengineering and weather modification programs. So this is small, but it's not small. It's actually huge. It's going to have a big ripple effect. So that's in a very, very tight nutshell. I don't know if you have some questions. I kind of gave you a lot really quickly.
I just sat down for a glass of water. Yeah. But well, you said it's small, but it's not small. So how can we, and what can we in Canada do to support you and your legal case?
Well, I think one of the best things you could do is, I am connected through Nikki Florio to an attorney up in Canada, Tony Vaca, and he's already, brought this before the Canadian courts, and the Canadian courts did say that he could appeal, but basically it was out of their jurisdiction. So what we are doing is we are trying to find other nations, especially like the Five Eyes, like UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America, of course. We have the Five Eyes. We'd love to have attorneys and lawsuits in all those different nations, hopefully that are duplicative of what we're doing here, right? So whatever we have here, we're willing to hand over and give to you to apply from your respective area, your respective location. And so it'd be really great if people would be interested to also start a legal process, however we go after them. Now, you may say, well, make sunsets doesn't affect us, but interestingly enough, in their application, they are planning on doing geoengineering in the United States and the whole entire planet. So I don't know how NOAA, I don't know how the Department of Commerce has that kind of authority to give them approval to spray the whole entire planet, but that's their intention. So you could actually maybe tag tail on us. The other thing I would say is, which is to me, the hardest part is the fundraising. We have attorneys, we have legal researchers. They're all doing work on discounted rates. I'm doing this for free. I'm willing to do the heavy lifting. We have people willing to do the heavy lifting, and we're going out there. And the two big things we need is publicity. If you know influencers, radio show hosts, publications, anybody who has a presence to get the word out there, that would be fantastic. A television show, as well as a fundraising. We're looking at doing some kind of online fundraising where we'll bring down some different experts in the respective fields to do a 2-hour show, raise some monies, have different geoengineering groups around the country, around Canada, watching at the same time, trying to possibly raise, okay, this is how much we think we can raise. We can raise $1,000 from our group, or 2,000 or 10,000. And we try to do a massive fundraiser around the nation and around North America. These are the two biggest things that we need the assistance with. Everything else, we've got the best attorneys. We've got a great team of attorneys. They're the best in evidentiary, constitutional, environmental law, and they're doing a superb job. Many of them are on a huge learning curve around geoengineering. They were not really familiar with it, but again, they're coming at it through the environmental and the constitutional lens. So we've got that covered. It's really the publicity, the fundraising, and if you guys are interested in taking on the same legal course as us, the more nations we can have on board with us, coming from all different jurisdictions, the better.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Reinette. Yes, we definitely will take that on, because we were talking about an injunction or maybe a cease and desist, whatever works best. And we do have our most incredible legal expert around us, and he will help us to get something really big started. Together we will win. Absolutely. Right. We will. Yeah. Is there anybody else? Is there any other question? Maybe for Reinette. Oh yeah, her website. Her website is
So saveourskies.org, saveourskies.org. And then the umbrella organization, which is the 501c3 here in the States, is known as Gen7. That's GENSEVEN, gen7.org. And to let you know, last year, well, actually the 2022 election, I did run for governor of California, and with no party affiliation. And the whole entire basis of this campaign was, it's based upon the 7th generation principle, which is every decision you make today should serve 7 generations from now. And so Gen7 is the umbrella organization that has Save Our Skies underneath it. And so there's that. And also Dina Pollard-Sachs, she also has a new website called Lord Advocates, Lord, Lord Advocates, lordadvocates.org. And she's all about taking on fights like ours, like really going out there and protecting the environment and our civil liberties and so on. So Lord Advocates, saveourskies.org, and also Gen7. And also, you know, here in the United States, just to let you all know, when I was running for governor, I was telling the story how when I was on the city council and as mayor, I'd always been asking, once you get elected, then what's your measurement for your leadership? How do you know someone's making a good decision? And that's when I really turned to that 7th generation principle. And most people don't know, but the great nations of the Iroquois Confederacy inspired our forefathers. Benjamin Franklin spent a lot of time with them, and they had what was known as the Great Law of Peace. And if you hold them side by side, the Great Law of Peace and the Constitution are almost verbatim. And the one thing that we did not really focus on as heavily as they did is that 7th generation principle. So what I've been saying to people as a leader, and what Gen7 is about, is holding our leaders, the legislators and so on, and the decision makers up to a standard where we can ask ourselves, the decisions you're making right now, is that serving 7 generations, or is that taking away from them? And that should be our metrics. We need something like that. So while I was looking at using a Gen7 with a different methodology, when we were dealing with the weather manipulation, we were dealing with the last winter we've been dealing with our skies being blocked out, not seeing the sun for weeks at a time, I realized that I had to do something very different. And that's where I decided to take the legal course. And I realized that it doesn't matter what's important to me, whether I want to save the salmon or the redwoods, as long as they're being sprayed with these heavy metals and these chemicals and so on, we can actually be sprayed with anything, we're not going to make it to 7 generations. So, and that's because our salmon, our redwoods, you know, our hummingbirds, our pollinators, they're all slowly being poisoned, including ourselves. And so I realized in order to even support that 7 generation principle, we have to reclaim and clean up our skies before we can actually, you know, have the healthy planet that we all deserve. And we absolutely need.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And you were mentioning the hummingbirds. The hummingbirds where I live usually come around mid of April and leave, I would say mid of August to the end of August. They are gone. They are not even, they didn't really show up. I saw 5 of them. And yeah, it was really devastating because I love them so much. They're so so cute. But yeah, so they came in late. We had a horrible winter. On November the 5th, actually, of last year, the snow came in, and it was where I live. It was a solid blanket of snow until the end of March. And that's probably a reason why the hummingbirds were late anyway. But, and then they came in, and then I saw 5, and now they're gone. They disappeared probably, I would say 4 weeks ago already. So that's devastating to see something like this happening. And I mean, it's beautiful green right now because we had a lot of rain. It was raining, it was coming down like crazy. So it's a beautiful green, but what else? You know, and what rained off, right? What came down actually and contaminated our soil and the ground. And okay, so there is something. Okay, go.
Thank you for that. So there you go. And if you want, you can also feel free to hit the, I think it's about 2 minutes long or so, the little video I did. If you have any interest, that's our trailer. That's our promo video I put together that, you know, has gotten out there and helped generate some of the funds.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. And we shared it, you know, quite a bit. It's circulating here in Canada. We have it on the website. We have it in our newsletter and on Telegram and everywhere. So,
well, you know, and I want to say too, you know, I've been a community activist and very much on the front lines for well over 20 years. And I like being hands-on. It's my preference. And interestingly enough, over the years, I have noticed, especially now with COVID being locked away and people really being more homebound, I have noticed since the uptick on social media and so on, that there's been a drop in active civic engagement beyond the screen and the keyboards. And I don't see people engage at meetings like they used to be. I don't see them in the streets like they used to be. I don't see them doing projects or measuring things or coming together and becoming, an ad hoc organization or just dealing with whatever is facing them. What's happened, and I'm guilty of this too, by the way, because I consider myself a keyboard warrior as well. But we're too dependent upon the screens, and we need the screens to communicate, but then we need to go out into the streets. And so one of the other thing, and get involved, go to the meetings, face to face. In person is so much more powerful. So with this lawsuit, we have taken a multi-pronged approach. I know the court systems can be absolutely just crooked. I know things may go awry. I know how people can mess with court cases and just take them off the rails. But we're also being smart and using this court case as a way to draft people together, like a NASCAR race car, pull people forward to get the publicity, to let people know this is real. We've got one of the best teams in America, legal teams, working on this because it's not a conspiracy theory, and to really give it the attention that it needs. But our objective then is to really teach people. And I'll be coming out next week with my schedule. Just twice a month, we're going to have bi-monthly webinars to teach people how to go to their city council meetings or your county supervisor meetings, whatever your meetings are called in Canada, and actually put your elected officials and your appointed officials on notice, to give them the data and the science saying, look, you may not know about this, but you have been informed, you're officially informed. And now it's your job, because you've taken an oath, to stop that this is a crime being committed against us. And so that's known as a notice of liability. Now, it applies here in America. I believe it can apply also in Canada. But how it is here in America is that you are protected within your seat of whatever position you hold, whether it's an appointment or you're elected. You have a little bit of a firewall of protection. But once it is believed that you're actually committing a crime, then you lose that protection. So what we're doing as the peoples, we're actually putting our elected officials and appointees on notice that a crime is being committed. Either they do something about it, or they're either covering it, or they're participating in it. And so that's a notice of liability. And we're also going to teach people how to do open letters, which is basically also scientifically based. You send it off to your water or air quality board, you send it off to your leaders, but you also make sure you put it in the newspaper and you put it in print in public so they can see it's an open letter, again, putting all these different entities on notice. So we want to do that. We want to have people at intersections, over overpasses. We really want people to start paying attention to the skies and paying attention to the rain and the snow and the hail, water sample results, and realizing that we have to change drastically, because I think we are in the midst of a collapse, a biological collapse.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of people go out on the streets, I mean, people don't see the enemy anymore. We saw the enemy when we had to put the face diapers on, which I never did. But this is what, then people realize there is something going on, and that's weird. And so many people came out. And when we did the worldwide rallies, we had really a huge success with the worldwide rally. And I remember, and you guys remember that too, it was January 22nd. That was the day before the truckers convoy rolled out of BC. We had the most successful worldwide rally in Kelowna, and more than 2,000 people marched with us. When we started the march, and people started, they started marching, and we have a certain route, right? We march. People were still at where we started the march, and they already came to the highway. So we usually march to the highway, and people were marching to the highway, but there were still people where we start off the march. It was that big. This was an incredible day. And I think for the world. And then the truckers convoy rolled out of BC, and they landed in Ottawa just 5 days later. It was something else. But now people don't realize that we still have to do something. We must not stop, and nothing's going to stop me anyway. But there is no enemy, no visible enemy, and that is the problem.
Well, that's also, like we're fighting 5G. You can somewhat grapple 5G. You can grapple glyphosates and, certain toxic chemicals, but what's happening over our heads is really hard. Like, who you go after. And of course, it's not like there's a silver BB or silver bullet in all this. It's, a multitude of silver BBs. So this has been a big monster for a long time. And as I've talked to Jim and other people in the geoengineering realm, we've all been kind of waiting for some iconic figure to come up and take that baton and do something. And so that's why, we're doing what we're doing. I don't have deep pockets. I've never actually in my life ever gone out and hired an attorney ever in my life. And we're just jumping in with both feet. But, it's one of those things that's, it's not invisible, but we can't go out there and step on the doorsteps of the perpetrator's, door and say, hey, you stop this. It's a little more complicated than that. And so we have to kind of keep peeling back that onion and look for the weak point in the whole entire system. So, and can I, Bettina, do you mind? I see there's some questions people are asking. Should I answer those?
Is there any? Yes, there is.
I'm noticing some comments in the chat. Is there anything?
Right. That's what I see. So I see one is jet trail suppression. Does it not just make a bigger problem of toxicity from the skies invisible, but still there? Did you want to answer that, Jim, or?
Yeah, I can. What I was saying, I must be sure up, don't I? First off, I'd like to say I've been working with Reinette. I met Reinette through Nikki Florio. You probably shared it already, but if you guys have not seen it, it's a GiveSendGo. Please support this. GiveSendGo.com/stopUSgeoengineeringlegalfund. And I want everybody to share this around because, like I said, I've been working with Reinette on this, trying to supply as much information to their legal team as possible. I'm a good judge of character, and I know that Reinette and company are definitely, part of the good ones. Definitely not out. This is not a money-making gimmick. I have met with her lawyer. Her lawyer is real. So please support what Reinette's doing because I don't know of anybody else who's going to be willing to do this. I certainly can't do this. I might know everything there is to know about the topic, but I sure as hell can't, find a lawyer and get it done. And by making an example of Luke Eisman and Make Sunsets, this would set a precedent of, basically, letting people know if you screw with this guy, there are penalties. Like you can be held to account. But Graylin asked in the chat about jet trail suppression. Does it not make a bigger problem of toxicity in the skies invisible, but is it still there? And I said, yes, more poisons, less clouds, just invisible clouds. So you got to watch out because if you just complain about the clouds, and I've made this point to Reinette multiple times that the geoengineering that they're actually shooting for has nothing to do with the clouds. It has to do with the buildup of aerosols, all those toxic nanoparticles that brightens the sky and makes it white. So the whitening of the sky as a whole is geoengineering. If you focus on just the clouds, you're going to miss the milky white sky. And if you focus on just the clouds, then they might actually go, well, you know what? We can get rid of the clouds, but you're not going to like the solution because the nanoparticles that make that milky white haze in the sky will still be there. However, you're now just going to have invisible chemtrails, like the real thing, where they're injecting chemicals to melt the ice. Imagine, if you will, a world where every single plane is spraying antifreeze out the back of it. That would be the solution, because everybody knows how antifreeze works in your car. That's what would cause, cloud condensation nuclei. Water would not be able to stick to the specks of dust, to the soot, to the metal nanoparticles, and form ice. The only known solution for that is antifreeze. So some kind of chemical cocktail to anti-freeze the trails is no solution at all. And real quickly, Reinette had said something that kind of just struck a chord with me. It resonated. And I wanted to just kind of highlight this with a tiny little skosh of science that you guys might find interesting. She said that she noticed that there aren't as many people who are willing to do something about this. And there's a gentleman by the name of Alexander Shizvesky, who put forth this idea of what's called sunspots and mass excitability. So I did a little chart real quick while y'all were talking, and I'm going to share the screen real quick.
You did. Of course.
I wanted, because it resonated with me, so I wanted to make sure that you guys got to see this. So I'll put it up on the screen real quick. So this is Alexander Chizhevsky. I'm hoping I'm not completely butchering that. This is the guy's name. And one of the reasons that we're seeing a real slack off in the activism side of things is because of the sun, according to him. So he came up with this idea of sunspots and mass excitability. And in it, he describes basically the four components of Shizhevsky's 11-year cycle of the sun. So I'll just, I took the four cycles, and then I looked up, exactly where we are in the solar cycle to give you an idea of what the hell's been going on. And this is what it looks like. So that's supposed to be at the end. Anyway, all right. So 2018 to 2021, a 3-year cycle period, a 3-year period of minimum activity characterized by passivity and autocratic rule. 2021 through 2023, a 2-year period during which masses begin to organize under new leaders and one theme. Sound like the global warming alarmism to you? The next solar maximum is in 2025. Isn't that a magic number that's been mentioned multiple times today? Owning the weather in 2025. The other paper about the military in 2025. 2025 and 2030. You hear these numbers over and over. There's reasons for this, because they understand how the sun and the moon affect human emotion and their ability to do things. So 2024 through 2026, a 3-year period of maximum excitability, revolution, and war. So and I've noticed this during my 15 years, because the solar cycle is an 11-year cycle, that during the last solar maximum was around 2012 to 2013. Back then, the chemtrail community was going harder than a mother, what. They were going ham. And suddenly the interest just dropped off. And I said, you know why? Because 2027 through 2030, a 3-year period of gradual decrease in excitability until the masses are apathetic. And then back to the cycle repeats itself, a 3-year period of minimum activity characterized by passivity and autocratic rule. So we're coming upon a small window where the entire planet is going to be energized from 2024 through 2026, this critical juncture in the energy coming from our sun needs to be capitalized on, because it's that short and fleeting. all of the rest of the 11-year cycle doesn't sound very good for change in the world. But basically, Shizahevsky, Alexander, I'm just stop saying his last name, Alexander, he was pointing out that all of the major revolutions throughout history occurred during solar maximums. Mm-hmm. So when you understand this electric nature of the universe and how our nervous systems are basically electrical antenna, that we send and receive signals from the sun, from EMF sources, whether if you're worried about 5G, that's because your nervous system is an antenna and it's attached to your brain. And when you put outside electricity into an antenna, it goes to the brain, it creates hormones. Those hormones can cause all kinds of diseases, paranoia, everything. So when you understand, and I believe this to be fact from my own observations of the internet as a whole, interpersonal relationships in my own life, that during these solar cycles, you do see this type of, and I see it in myself. I have to fight it because I know that we're literally in the slack off period. Yeah, you cannot make this up. So, I mean, the last time was 2015 to 2018. That was everybody's unwinding from the last solar maximum. And in 2015, we were going to the EPA and nobody seemed to care. And I was like, look, this is a monumental occurrence. We're going to Washington, D.C. We're going to take it to the man. And very few people care. So you have to take advantage of this. And we're coming up on this period. I think that we should see monumental change. I hope we don't see World War III. But revolution might be a good thing.
Right. Well, I think I can second that just from my own observations of being, out in the community. It's definitely cyclical. Mm-hmm.
We've got one more question for you, Reinette.
The fundraising aspect of the U.S. If you win your cases, does that set, and it sets precedents, can we in Canada use that?
Yes, you can. Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And it sets precedents for all the other geoengineering projects that have gone through NOAA, who have also filled out their application like Make Sunsets did. It's not, we're picking on one, but it affects all of them. It affects all of them. And it sets a global precedence, especially because it's America. That's why the Canadian legal team, the judge said, we're not doing this because it's out of our jurisdiction. Even we said, you've got to stop. We don't have the power to stop it. You have to go to the biggest perpetrator of all, which is the United States. And once they have a case, then you can come back here in Canada and appeal under the same pretense, same arguments, and start moving forward. Yeah.
What is NOAA?
NOAA. Okay. Reinette, can you again spell out NOAA for
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Okay. All right. Is there any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's it.
Okay. No, I was just asking the crowd here. Is there any other question for Reinette or Jim?
Well, I do want to answer. There's a couple of questions here in the chat. The one that was asked of Jim, talking about making the trails invisible. One of the things I've gotten from Jim, speaking to him, is that our jet fuel, the JP-8, right, is a single-use fuel, and that's meant for all these different type of aircraft, military, commercial, Black Hawk, military vehicles, and so on. One size fits all, essentially. And I'd asked Jim this last interview we just did. I said, well, why or are they adding all these heavy metals? Why do you need aluminum, barium, strontium, cadmium, chromium, copper? I mean, the list goes on. And he says they're not adding it. It's there. It's in the oil, and they're just not extracting it. They're not refining it out. And so I think one of the things we have to look at, and this would take some time, but what we'd have to look at is we have to have cleaner jet fuel. We have to have it so it does not have those heavy metals. They're just not necessary. And that will take time. And it will take a global a global shift from the citizens themselves to demand that we do not use this dirty type of fuel. And I think that would probably be one of the best things we could do. Or we could look at, different type of flying vehicles, whether it's using, magnets or, zero point energy ethers. I don't know. But I think we should also start exploring something other than the engines that we have right now.
Hoverboards, back to the future. Okay, was there any other question? Sorry, I can't really see the chat. Any other question? Okay. Okay.
Aren't they adding specific chemicals? Isn't it a different cocktail that they're adding? Spraying into it? It's not just dirty fuel. Aren't they specific?
But there's some things there are some things they're adding. In fact, I'll let Jim take this because he can answer better than me. There are additives, like, as you said, to stop any kind of static electricity and so on. But why don't you answer that question, Jim?
Yeah, there are many different additives that are required in certain types of fuel. But I want to go back to real quick before I answer that. Reinette mentioned changing drastically the fuel and the whole idea of this biofuels for contrail control. Well, the same thing happened when I showed that slide about MIT saying we're about to stop a massive experiment. There is a spider crawling up to my camera. Yeah. You got to love the bugs in South Carolina. That they wanted to ban bunker fuel in international shipping because bunker fuel is heavy fuel oil, is the dirtiest fuel oil, dirtiest type of fuel you can use. So they banned it. And as a result, we've seen less ship tracks since 2020 when the international ban for bunker fuel went into place. However, sometimes the solution is worse than the problem. The medicine can be worse than the disease. And this is what we ended up with. Shipping Gate, why toxic VLSFO Frankenstein fuel is such a danger for the planet. So this is called very low sulfur fuel oil, VLSFO. So now they're not using bottom of the barrel bunker fuel. They're using these biofuels, or the same idea in planes, jet fuel. Biofuels are very low sulfur alternative aviation fuels. They call it Frankenstein fuel for a reason, because there literally been ships that catch on fire. The smokestacks are now more poisonous than ever. Yeah, they're not creating as many clouds. It's exactly the same question that Graylin asked in chat. Yes, changing the fuel might help get rid of the clouds, but the alternative may be worse than what we're already dealing with. And that's
called Javon's paradox, where you make matters worse by trying to make them better. And that's rampant in the green economy and so on, the industries. But we do need to. I'm often asked about alternative energy. People are like, what do you think about this or that? And I said, look, I have one principle across the board, which is that we have to do a cradle to grave calculation on everything that we do, every industry. And it's not easy math, right? You've got to talk about the mining and the processing and the manufacturing and the packaging and the shipping, and then the waste side as well. And you have to look at that whole entire thing. And so when it comes to flying, when it comes to our cargo ships, when it comes to the military, we have to look at all of that. Otherwise, you might be committing a Javon's paradox, where you're actually trying to help something, you're making it worse. So my whole thing is, no matter what we think we need to do, whatever we decide upon, we have to conduct a cradle to grave calculation. We can no longer do anything until any type of alternative energy, any alternative vehicle or any fuel is better than what we have, until we do a cradle to grave calculation on all of it. And that's not an easy undertaking.
I agree. I fully agree with that. And so to answer the question about the additives, there are multiple different types of additives. And when I was talking to Reinette about this, we were having a discussion about environmental impact. And what you'll find is that I'm such a nerd that I not only found all the additives, but I had to find the material safety data sheets for each and every single one of them. And whenever you go and look at the material safety data sheets for all of these, they say the exact same thing. No studies have been done on the environmental impact of this. But to answer the question, the types of additives added to jet fuel, biocides, leak detection additives, corrosion inhibitors, lubricity improver, and then these are all the different companies that make one. So you can see the list there. Fuel system icing inhibitor, also known as EGME or DEGME, ethylene glycol methyl ether, static dissipator additive. There's only one, and it's called Status 450. It's trimethylbenzene, which is a Sera 313 chemical. If you don't know what Sera 313 is, that means cancer. Okay,
Right.
so anything that says Sera 313 is a cancer-causing chemical. Naphthalene, Sera 313, dinyl naphthyl sulfonic acid. Big points for the Southerner pronouncing the really, really long word. Denza, which is actually a barium salt additive. So this is, it says increasing, it increases the conductivity of the fuel, thereby increasing the rate of static conductivity of the fuel, thereby increasing the rate of static charge dissipation. So a static dissipator keeps static from building up or jumping to the fuel line and blowing people up. But the creepiest one of all is this plus 100 additive, and it's called a HITS additive or high thermal stability additive, HITTS. The Army has a no use policy on this. So in the NATO single fuel concept, the United States Army does not use plus 100 additives because they're like, we got no use for this and it just screws up our tanks. But most people do not know that planes use the jet fuel as the same way your car uses a radiator. It uses the jet fuel tanks as a heat dissipator. Therefore, it says that this plus 100 additive increases the thermal stability of fuel by 100 degrees Fahrenheit to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that normally jets can heat the gas tank up to 320 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know Celsius or centigrade. You do the math, the calculations, but this HITS additive is specifically for the planes that are showing that I showed earlier, flying at 49,000 feet where it's really, really, really cold. And it allows them to heat the gas up even hotter so that they don't have icing of the fuel lines and things like that. So, of course, the military made something called Spec Aid 8Q462. That's their special one. Which of course uses trimethylbenzene, naphthalene, trade secret ingredient. And you keep looking at these things. You see this over and over again. Almost all of these are loaded with sulfur. They're loaded with cancer causing chemicals. They almost always have naphthalene in it. Go figure. But heavy paraffinic. Paraffin is a wax, so of course it causes additional smoking, more carbon black dust. Is it for the purpose of creating carbon black and soot? I don't know. You be the judge of that. But antioxidants, and then finally metal deactivator additives. And I have a chart that basically breaks down, every type of fuel and what they actually are used for. So you can actually see at the top, Jet A1, Jet A, Defense Standard 9191. These are the military NATO defense standards for like Jet A1, F44, F40, the IATA standard. And then that's Jet A1. That's used worldwide. America uses Jet A almost exclusively. That's the ASTM standard. But then you have mil specs for JP4, JP5. And basically you can see in one column over here, they have the different additives like antioxidant, and then it'll say R, O, R, or whatever. And down at the bottom, if you look at it, optional, agreement, engine manufacturer's agreement, or required. So any place you see an R, that is a required additive. And almost every fuel status 450 is required. It's only optional on 1, 2 fuels. So this General Electric fuel nobody uses, and it's optional in Jet A in America. So as you go down through the chart, you can see these are all the different types of additives and which, fuels actually use it. This chart and all of these material safety data sheets can be found at climateviewer.com/cirrus clouds matter. So you can find that on just by going to the menu at the top and clicking on artificial clouds. That's the easiest way to find it. And go to the section titled "Are Jet Engine Emissions Dangerous?" And you'll see all the material safety data sheets, and you can dig that up yourself. But to give an example of just one material safety data sheet, I have to pull all of these from there. Let's see, I'll just do a quick search for environment, and they all say the same thing. Accidental release, please don't do that. Exposure control, there's nothing in here about the environment. And toxicological effects, don't drink it, but ecological information, you cannot make this up. Why is it not letting me scroll over there? Hello, McFly. All right. Anyway, ecological information, aquatic toxicology, no data available. Biodegradation, no data available. And that's pretty much the story of every single one of these I've ever seen. When you get to the environmental studies on any of these fuel additives, or even the fuel itself, because I have a one for just the JP8 jet fuel, it says the same thing. No environmental studies have been done.
Amazing.
I think that pretty much nails it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Wow. Okay, is there anything else for Reinette, for Jim? Oh, one more.
Okay, you can hear me from here, I guess.
So this goes to the fellow there. I'm surprised you didn't talk about acid rain, because if you're adding sulfur to the atmosphere, you're going to get acid rain. And I'm going like, okay, so we've heard about the idea of depopulating the planet. Is this geoengineering got to do with that? Because I'm going, you add acid rain, you're going to kill all the plants, you're going to kill all the animals, and you probably kill the humans as well.
Well, I did briefly mention acid rain during my my presentation, but to be specific, the geoengineering proposals for sulfur, stratospheric sulfur injections, focus on mainly 2 things, and that's either sulfur dioxide or sulfuric acid. So I'm thinking H2SO4. Like, yeah, in my mind, I'm thinking numbers and letters, and my mouth's not cooperating. So H2SO4, sulfuric acid, or SO2, sulfur dioxide. If you use sulfur dioxide, because of the chemical changes that happen if you disperse it in the stratosphere, it's going to turn into sulfuric acid anyway.
That's right. So
they've done studies on this. The biggest study that they do is called GeoMIP, GeoMIP, or the Geoengineering Model Intercomparison Project. You can look it up, GeoMIP. And they have all these different computer geoengineering models. They're really creepy. I try not to curse whenever I'm talking about geoengineering because it just naturally flows out of my mouth, and I'm trying to be a gentleman here. But basically, I would agree with you that like if you want to know for yourself I would suggest go to climateviewer.com/geoengineering. And on that page, I have a couple slides that basically geoengineering is going to kill people. So you come to this page, scroll past, the PowerPoint presentations I've done, the technology section on solar radiation management, earth radiation management, and carbon dioxide removal. And right here's a fact. And on the frequently asked question page, you'll see all of the people involved in geoengineering, like David Keith, Ken Caldera. These are the two worst offenders. Ben Kravitz, he's in charge of studying the rainfall patterns that change as a result of it, which goes right to what you're talking about with sulfuric acid. And Alan Robach was the guy who mentioned earlier about spraying, sulfur using jet fuel or just dumping it out of the back of planes. But thanks to Reinette's latest post, I found this beautiful graphic and then recreated it. These two show who's paying for the geoengineering. And it's pretty important to understand to follow the money. And when you follow the money and you look at all of these different foundations and ventures and all of that, and even China's in on the mix, you come to this conclusion, is it going to kill people? And to that point, David Keith, the guy that I just showed you, in this video, when you click play, I don't think it'll come through the mic if I hit play, but David Keith, he literally says, and maybe I won't, it'll be feedback, but he says, if we do a program like I want to do and release, let's say, 1 million tons of sulfur into the atmosphere, that will kill many tens of thousands of people. And this is straight out of his mouth. So is it a depopulation plan? Well, then he goes and he makes the Oppenheimer argument. Well, it's our hope that geoengineering would, save many more lives than it would take. It's the same thing that Robert Oppenheimer said when they said, well, let's end the war. And that will, if we end the war with the atomic bomb, then many lives will be saved. The problem with that was that it was all based on a lie. The Japanese had already surrendered multiple times before Harry Truman dropped the atomic bomb. And he dropped the atomic bomb to flex on Russia so that in post-war negotiations, he had a negotiating tool. This is historical fact. So geoengineers are making the same argument today that because global warming, because, runaway global warming could kill people, that we should legally worldwide deploy geoengineering, even though we know it will kill people. It is our hope that many more people will be saved from geoengineering than killed. So yes, it's true. If you use sulfur in any form, it will turn into sulfuric acid. That will have massive effects on ozone depletion, on acid rain, on all life on the planet. If they use any of the other chemicals that they've talked about, titanium dioxide, aluminum, calcium, or even diamond dust, any one of these will cause massive effects on human, animal, plant life, aquatic, all of the above. They know this. They've known this. I've got papers back to 2010 where they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that mimicking volcanoes through artificial means will kill people. And this is best exemplified by a gentleman named Peter Irvine, who says, this was on Ken Caldera's Geoengineering Forum, solar radiation management, how to deal with the losers. And the losers being dead people. It's likely that solar radiation management geoengineering intervention will create winners and losers. And some nations may always be against any intervention whatsoever. And I'll just get to the important part. Could it be determined if any changes in the climate outside the target area had occurred as a result of the intervention during a 10-year trial period? How would aggrieved nations or peoples seek reparations for perceived negative impacts, scientifically proven or otherwise. And this is from Pete Irvine. Well, it gets worse. They have this thing called the double catastrophe scenario, where we have climate change, we start stratospheric aerosol injection, and then we have intermittency, i.e., we stop spraying suddenly, or we have World War III, so we can't continue to spray. So now we have a double catastrophe on our hands, which leads to social collapse, which keeps the cycle going round and round. This is from an author named Seth Baum. Double catastrophe, intermittent stratospheric geoengineering induced by societal collapse. This was written in 2013. So when you look at it from any angle, geoengineering governance, the only thing that's holding up the legalization of geoengineering today is the idea that they need to figure out how to pay the dead people. Because just like with volcanoes, Ben Kravitz, when he did his, hydrological cycle impacts studies with computer models, came to the same conclusion as the natural analog volcanoes. When you put a bunch of sulfur into the stratosphere, you create acid rain on a worldwide basis. That changes rainfall patterns. In some of the larger volcanoes in the past, volcanic eruptions in the past, the Amazon River basin almost completely dried up. If you were to geoengineer, in almost all of the computer models, the southern hemisphere gets drier. The northern hemisphere gets wetter. So what does that mean? That means dead brown people in the southern hemisphere. Sorry, Australia, I'm lumping you in there. Dead brown people and wet white people. But guess what, white people? You're going to be, wet with acid rain. So it's a twofer. You're going to kill everybody by creating famine and drought in the southern hemisphere, and you're going to kill everybody in the northern hemisphere because the water will kill your organic crop faster than a weed whacker. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, one other thing further to that, because, okay, they talk about these 15-minute cities throughout Europe and everything. And I finally figured out there's so many things today that just don't make sense. But this is the one thing that makes sense listening to you. I'm going like, oh, they want to keep the price of oil down so you can still fly, but you can't drive your car.
Right.
So that's going to kill us faster.
Well, I was listening to RFK Jr. being interviewed the other day, and he made an interesting point that the guy who was responsible for eradicating the smallpox epidemic basically, came out of retirement during COVID to say, no, you don't lock people down. And one of the biggest arguments he made was that locking people down will, create indoor boxes where everybody's going to just spread the virus anyway. But more importantly, unemployment kills people. And if you look at Macron in France, and if you know about the yellow vest movement, when they tried to jack up the gas prices to an exorbitant fee to reduce use, or as Larry Fink from BlackRock would say, force behavior. People don't like being forced to behave, and they certainly disproportionately affect poor people like me when they screw with the price at the pump. So at some point we will reach this critical mass. And guess what? 2024 through 2026 happens to be a solar maximum. So it's probably a bad time to be screwing with people. Ask Anheuser-Busch. People are getting activated right now. And this climate pushback, the talk of climate lockdowns, it's just going to backfire tremendously. I hope that it doesn't end in bloodshed. I always end videos I make with attack ideas, not people. But damn, we're getting close to the attacking people part, because when you threaten people's livelihoods, the only solution for them sometimes is pitchforks and, fires.
Right.
Wow, so people are pretty overwhelmed, but thank you so much, you two, Reinette and Jim. This was absolutely incredible. It's after 4 already. I would like to wrap this up here on our Geoengineering Free Canada's conference with just a few final notes here. And
Bettina, there's one more question on the chat
one more question on chat. Okay,
from Dave
go ahead.
Hilderman. Perhaps we can get him to chime in.
Sure. Okay, can you read? Sorry, go ahead.
Dave's muted.
Unmute yourself, Dave.
Oh, and I have to get off in about 1 minute, unfortunately. Is that
okay? All I want to say is the CO2 coalition, we've had something significant happen with John Klosser becoming on the board of directors. He got the Nobel Prize in 2022 in physics. And he's going internationally saying that all this climate alarmism is a scam. And it's actually getting some traction. It was covered in Newsweek. The Epoch Times just did a story on it, I think yesterday. So I think we have to change people's ideas. Like it all comes down to this crazy idea that there's a climate emergency and there isn't one. So that's hopefully is hopeful, but there's been lots of things that there seem to be hopeful as well in the past, like ClimateGate. Seemed like all these emails that got out about the fraudulent stuff about climate. But anyway, all we can do is try to spread more of this stuff. And I think that's what you guys are doing. So that's great. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Okay, well, then on our end, Reinette, you're still on, or do you still
I'm still on. I have to head on out though, but I do want to say thank you to everyone here. And you are all certainly ahead of the curve. And I think Jim's really hit the nail on the head, which is, I think the next 3 years are going to be historic. So I think that people are waking up quickly, and we're going to all try to be the tip of the spear for those folks. So I hate having to check out, but I just want to say thank you to everyone here. Just thank you to all of you. You're incredible heroes. Thank you. And thank you for organizing.
Thank you, Reinette.
Thank you, Reinette.
Thank you, everyone.
Reinette's the best. And if you guys don't support her, I'm going to personally come up to Canada and track you down.
Don't do that.
Yeah, you guys did a fabulous interview that I just saw posted, Jim. That was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's good people. I can promise you that.
Yeah, she is. Yeah. I think this is an incredible group right now anyway, with you, Jim, with Nikki, Reinette, and us here. So I think we will get the ball rolling, and we will rock the planet for sure.